Get the broadcast on. All right. We'll do Michael and then Darren for the order. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 453 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley.
And Darren Hughes.
In today's episode, we're going to be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1945 or 1947, if you want to go by the U.S. release, Children of Paradise, which I didn't put it in my notes. I'll just add it here. Was when they were advertising it in America, they said it was the French response to Gone with the Wind. So let that sit.
That's a wild claim to make.
Yeah. So we have that in part 2. And then part 1, we got just some movies that we saw this week, including 1 or 2 relatively new releases. I'll kick us off. The first one is, I feel like, one that's been pretty talked about on the art house indie circuit, and that is Past Lives. This is the feature directorial debut of Celine Song, who wrote and directed the film. It's loosely based off of her own life. She is a playwright, I think more well known in that space. This is kind of her first foray into feature filmmaking. And it stars Greta Lee, who is somebody I feel like if you see her, you'll know who I'm talking about, but you probably don't know her name. She's popped up in a number of like television shows. I think most notably the show Russian Doll on Netflix. But it's
Oh my gosh, that's where I'd seen. I've watched this trailer so many times. I'm like, why does she look so familiar? That's it.
She's been in a lot of different television. I think in like I'm guessing, but like kind of like Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like has popped up and stuff for a very long time. But this is kind of a feature role for her. Yu Teo, who is the Korean actor in this, and then John Magaro, who real talented actor. I think most people know him from recent Kelly Reichardt movies such as First Cow and Showing Up. But the movie follows Nora, who's the Greta Lee character, and Hae Sung, the Yu Tao character. And it's broken up into 3 parts. The first part, they're children. They're living in South Korea, but Nora, her parents, who are, I think one is I think they're both artists. Her dad is a filmmaker. Her mom's an artist. Are immigrating from South Korea to Canada, and so you get a brief kind of moment of like their Nora and Hae Sung's friendship. They're kind of childhood sweethearts. But then that portion's pretty short because then she ends up moving away, and then it picks up in the second part, which is I think 12 years later, or 12 years later. And Nora is now a graduate student. She's living in New York City. And just because of, the timeline we're working with, Facebook is becoming more prevalent. And through that, she becomes reconnected with Hae Sung, and they start kind of, they reconnect and start talking again. It's been so long they haven't talked since they were children. He kind of pokes fun at her because her Korean has started to get kind of rusty, and she talks about how she only uses Korean while talking with him and her mother. But then things transpire. They kind of drift apart, and the last part of the movie is 20 years from the beginning of the movie. And Nora is now married to what's his name? Arthur, the John Magaro character, and they've been married for about 7 years. And Hae Sung is just recently out of a relationship and has come to visit New York City and was going to spend some time with Nora. But yeah, this was one. It got pretty. I think it premiered at Sundance. It's been kind of buzzy since then. A lot of people have been talking about it since it's started to roll out into theaters. For the most part, I liked it. I thought I enjoyed it. It definitely kind of captures. It has a lot of that kind of romantic tension that you would want from this, of these kind of, The timing never lined up, but there's definitely still something there. Two people who are kind of just, ships crossing in the night. And I think for the most part, the two main actors are pretty good. I think especially Greta Lee's, when she and Yu Tao are together, they're pretty strong in kind of capturing that. Though I will have to say, though, in his very limited role, John Magaro's probably the best acting in this movie. He's very good in his, as the husband of Nora. The couple things that I had there, I read a lot of reviews talking a little bit about just the about kind of the language, the kind of culture clash of the movie. One of the things that I saw was that a number of people, and I was talking to a friend actually recently, and she mentioned that her friend who is Korean really did not like this movie because she just couldn't get past how bad she felt like Greta Lee's Korean accent was. But then I saw other people who were talking about it, kind of going, "Yeah, it's like it's rusty. It's not great, or it's not great, but it's not refined. Like it seems like somebody who has been living like in North America for a extended period of their life compared to living in Korea." And so that would be a natural thing. You would kind of assume that happens because she's probably not speaking Korean all the time. While you have somebody like Hae Sung, who is living in Korea, like that's his, he's predominantly speaking that, and it seems much more like his the way he's speaking is a little bit more refined in his language than she would be. So that's been kind of interesting to explore just on those levels. The other thing, just on a more cinematic level, I didn't think that this was. I wouldn't say in any way that this is necessarily poorly directed, but it's very safely directed. It feels very akin to like episodes of like Succession or prestige television that feels very neat and very clean and very all the pieces are together. But like with something like this where you kind of like where you want to like really capture that like there's just kind of this untapped sexual tension between these two characters. I'm not saying like go full Wong Kar-wai, but like I think the actors do a good job of like kind of having this push and pull and like this inability to kind of act on maybe the desires that they have, but I never really felt that communicated through the camera. And or I just this is, again, like this is Celine Song's her first movie, and she doesn't poorly direct it, but I'm just kind of like with something like this where you really want to, especially in that last act, really want to like kind of tug at that just untapped desire. I just never really felt like there was a moment where like these two might act on something. It never really felt like the camera was really pulling in that direction or kind of playing with our expectations or our emotions. It just seemed very like clean. But Darren, I know you saw this a while back. What were your thoughts on Past Lives?
Yeah, it's been, I saw it in Berlin in February, so it's been a while, but I remember, I remember reading about the like rave reviews out of Sundance and thinking, okay, this movie is like made for me. Like I have a real weakness for certain kinds of melodramas, and I was waiting as I was watching it. I kept waiting for it to kind of open up and hit me, and it never did. But again, like the response in Berlin was really strong too, and so it was one of those moments where I kind of walked out of the theater and kind of kept my opinion to myself, just thinking, okay, it doesn't work for me, but that's fine. And then that night at dinner, two of my friends just started really like railing on the film. They actively disliked it. And it was good. I mean, it was helpful for me because I was like, okay, first of all, I'm not alone in this opinion. Yeah. But like the way you just described it as very adequately directed.
Yeah.
There's a critic, Mike D'Angelo, who always like his first criteria for a documentary is like, could I have just read a good newspaper, like a good magazine article instead? And I feel like I could have read the script for Past Lives and would have been affected as much as I was by the film itself.
Right? Yeah.
It
And
it felt very like by the numbers.
I
Yeah.
feel like you needed to take, to your point, like I think that it does create. I have a tough time because I can't speak to. I think that a lot of people are responding positively, like to the kind of cultural angst.
Hmm.
Like she's first generation. She's kind of she. Even though Hey Sung never really like challenges her, hard on like her Americanness or whatever. There is this kind of like, they talk a lot about how he's very traditionally Korean, especially Korean male. And she feels very Americanized, and like that kind of that's a lot of where their tension kind of lies. It's just how different they are in that respect. And so that's kind of tough. I can't say that I can really tap into that, but I did feel a distance to your point to the like melodrama, and I'm kind of like
Hmm.
I feel like at the core that's supposed to kind of be the universality that we're supposed to all kind of resonate on, is like this melodrama, like this yearning. And yeah, I think like I said, the directing's not bad, but it never it's trying to convey it, and maybe this is she's a playwright, like that's her
Yeah,
wheelhouse.
yeah,
she's
yeah.
she's trying to do it verbally, and I'm like, yeah, but this is a movie. We also need to have it spoken to us, using the camera. And I just never really felt like it, and that kind of kept it. That's why it kind of had distance to me in terms of the melodrama.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead or to like make her live up to an impossible standard,
Hmm.
but when I was rewatching Children of Paradise this week,
Hmm.
one of the things I loved about it was just how the screenwriter like pushes every scene beyond when it could have ended. So
Hmm.
every conversation goes another 2 minutes longer than I expected it to,
Hmm.
and there's constant invention and new ideas about love and um, constant sort of exploration of of these ideas about love.
Hmm.
And I remember watching Past Lives and thinking she was always ending the scene at like the easiest possible moment. None of the um, none of the scenes were challenging
Yeah, it was,
enough.
and it not that it had to be messy, but it wasn't a very messy movie. You have like
No.
this, like clearly those two, at the very least, wanted to make out. Like at the very least. And then you have the John Magaro character, and that's why I say he's really good, because he plays what you need out of that role perfectly. Like he kind of is just like, I'm not going to get in your way, but also I am your husband, and you're married.
Yeah.
And he plays that well, but like, yeah, I never felt like any of us were gonna get in trouble, and
No, that's a great way of putting it.
yeah. So
And there has to be some kind of transgression in a melodrama.
yeah, you kind of have to feel like, even if it's again, like you think back to the great ones, it doesn't have to even be that they kiss or do anything else. Like they could just touch arms, or like something very very inane, but it
Yeah.
feels like a transgression. And like again, like you feel that express that like they've done something completely
Yeah.
wrong. And I just never really felt that from this
The
from this
the
movie.
word that just came to mind is like I want the director of a melodrama to be perverse in some way.
Yeah.
And not just sexually perverse, but just like a perversity of taste or something, some
Hmm.
kind of expressionism in the filmmaking language.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just very television.
Yeah. So, it's still playing around. I mean, I recommend people
Oh
check it
yeah,
out. I think,
absolutely.
like I say, I don't, I say all that in critiquing it, but I also, I enjoyed it for what it was.
Hmm.
I just kind of wanted a little bit more, but,
Yeah.
Past Lives, it's in a lot of art house theaters now. It's distributed by A24, so they're usually pretty good at getting that available once it hits streaming in places like that. But Darren, I'm going to pass the mic over to you because you caught the most recent Christian Petzold movie.
Yeah, which I also saw in Berlin, but it's opening Thursday or Friday in New
Hmm.
York, and will be opening wider beyond that. It's being distributed by Janus Films and Sideshow Pictures, I think. So we can all expect to see it probably in a Criterion edition on the Criterion channel fairly soon. Yeah, so latest film by Christian Petzold, who's one of my favorite filmmakers of the 21st century. He's most known probably for Phoenix and
Hmm.
the other films that he made with Nina Haas over about a decade. Um, this one is I think kind of a change of pace for him. It's there's no real crime element or anything in it, and instead of being kind of a one-on-one love story, it's more of a group film. It was pretty obviously inspired by Eric Rohmer's La Collectionneuse, which is, if you've seen it, that's the one where the two guys go off to the little house in the woods and they meet a strange young girl and sort of spend their summer flirting with her. This one has the same basic premise. It starts with these two guys, I forget their names, Felix and Leon. They're both in their 20s. They're both artists of some ambition. Leon is working on his new novel. Felix is working on his photography portfolio. Felix is from a wealthier family, and they have a little cabin in the woods up on the northern coast by the Baltic Sea. And so the two of them begin the film by driving out to this house in the woods to kind of get away and to work on their projects. And when they get there, they discover that his mother has also rented out the house to, what's her name? Nadia, who's played by Paula Beer, who's the star of the last two Petzold films, Transit and Undina. And so there becomes sort of this uneasy relationship between the two guys and this girl. And then there are other dramas going on. There's a forest fire raging nearby. They discover right when they get there, and so it's kind of like the gun, that shows up in Act 1. The fire is going to play a more central role at some point in the film.
Chekhov's forest fire.
There you go, Chekhov. I couldn't remember who that was. Yes. But yeah, so just a really fun movie with great performances. I interviewed Petzold afterwards for CinemaScope and got to hear some of his story. And he was planning after Undina to do an adaptation of this really dark Georges Simenon novel called The Snow Was Dirty, which I read a couple weeks ago, and it's amazing. But it's really dark. It's about this young guy who is sort of losing his moral compass completely during the Nazi occupation of Brussels. Mm-hmm. And so when COVID kicked in, Petzold got sick and ended up spending a couple weeks in bed and started sort of watching Eric Rohmer films and went back and started watching like what he was thinking of as kind of like the great summer movies. Mm-hmm. Like he really loved, was it The Myth of the American Sleepover and a couple others. He just started watching these movies and he just got it in his head that he wanted to make. He said when he was in film school, one of his professors told him that you should make the kinds of films that when you watch 30 years later, you will know what it was like at that time to be young and to fall in love. Excuse me. And so I think he sort of completely changed course and started writing this film mainly as an excuse to just kind of, he has kids in his 20s and he was watching them sort of struggle with the isolation of quarantine and just thinking about the difference between his youth in the 70s and 80s and 90s and his own children. And he just wanted to make this like fairly lighthearted summer movie about young love. And also sort of a study of the young artist who is, sort of limited in his experience and maturity and, not the most evolved of young men, as Petzold was at that age. So anyway, it's just a really fun exploration of that stuff. And I just feel like I don't know if I could talk about this at length, but just like Petzold is just the most precisely calibrated filmmaker. Like I get joy from his films just in how good he is just as from shot to shot level. I just feel like he's as close as we have right now. And this comparison is almost a cliche at this point, but he's just like the classic Hollywood style filmmaker. He just knows what he's doing.
Yeah. I'm surprised he hasn't, but I'm happy. Like I'm glad he's kind of just, stayed over there. I'm surprised, like, Hollywood, not to like pull him into something, but like I could see him coming over and maybe trying to do like a English language drama or something like that.
Oh,
And
for
he's kind of
sure.
just stayed over in Europe. And yeah, I agree. Like it's just kind of a consistently strong, you know, just kind of a consistently strong filmmaker. He kind of reminds me, maybe you'll disagree. He reminds me I think this guy takes a lot more risks, so he's a little bit more like up and down than Petzold. But he reminds me a little bit of Steven Soderbergh in terms of just kind of like
Hmm.
keeping in line with like the basics of the craft. Soderbergh again takes a lot more risk and is trying to like kind of play with technology and things like that. But at the same time, Soderbergh also just has like the basics of entertaining you with visuals down, and like can always do that. What's Petzold like just as a person to talk to? He seems like he'd be kind of interesting to just pick his brain.
Oh, I'd heard for you. This was my first time interviewing him, and I'd heard for years that he's like the easiest, best interview in the game, and he really is. Just I was disappointed. He didn't do a whole lot of English language press when I was in Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to do a Zoom afterwards, which was disappointing at first, but we ended up talking for like 90 minutes. And he's just delightful. He's going to be,
Awesome.
I think he's going to be in New York this weekend and maybe LA too. And everybody who goes will just have the time of their lives. He's just a really fun guy. And, like I got him very easily distracted because something about this film reminded me of Vincent Minnelli.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I took the risk and asked him about it. And we ended up talking about Minnelli for like 15 minutes. And he told me a couple great stories. And it turned out that Some Came Running, which is my favorite Minnelli film, was
Mm-hmm.
the first film that he showed to the cast of Afire as they were planning. So he's just a diehard cinephile and is happy to sit and talk about movies as long as
awesome.
you've got his attention. Great guy.
Michael, did we talk about doing a Minnelli series? Did we have that conversation, or am I envisioning it?
That does not ring a bell to me, but
maybe that was with Nadine. At some point, I remember us talking about doing a Minnelli series.
We should do it. I'd be for it.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, hopefully that'll make its way to wider than New York and LA pretty soon. Because and if you haven't seen Christian Petzold movies, you should go watch Christian Petzold movies. A lot of them are generally on Criterion Channel. But yeah, I think probably the easiest one easiest accessible one, and that's the one that I saw first, was Phoenix.
Yeah.
But definitely go back. Criterion has a collection on the Criterion Channel of his first few films. But then a lot of his recent stuff, like you mentioned Undina, but also Transit, like those are all great. So
Transit,
yeah, so good,
great stuff. But yeah, very cool. All right, Michael, you're gonna take us home.
I'm taking it all home with a movie that's not recent at all. So today I watched the 1991 documentary Madonna: Truth or Dare, which is the kind of hybrid documentary of Madonna's Blonde Ambitions tour, which is when she was touring. It was she was like dating Warren Beatty at the time. So it was right around when she did like Dick Tracy. And it was also touring the Like a Prayer album.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the album? It definitely has Like a Prayer on it. I can envision the album in my mind, like the cover. But regardless, so this is like peak Madonna, right? But the kind of interesting conceit, which is less interesting in retrospect because it's become, for some types of films, like a kind of genre unto itself, is like half of the movie is concert footage, and it's like, Blonde Ambition is like just, a famously elaborate tour. She has like all these different actual film references. There's like a section where she's performing like the Clockwork Orange characters. She's another section that's based on Metropolis. And so like she's like shuffled her to then at that point, like, what was her whole career into these different categories and is performing in that way. And that's really kind of cool and interesting to watch. And it's also like Madonna at the peak of her just like star charisma, I guess. There's great songs too. I like this period of Madonna a lot. But then this is cut with this black and white, like cinema verite style of like following Madonna around in between the concerts. So either in like as she's like getting makeup, or when she's in hotel rooms, or she goes to this like weird, like awkward, like PR thing with a bunch of other celebrities. Like Kevin Costner shows up and says that her show is neat, and she has like a really viscerally negative reaction to that word, and just like spends like 5 minutes talking about that. At one point, she's touring in Spain, and is apparently Pedro Almodovar, and because of that, knows who a very young Antonio Banderas is, and so is like out to meet Antonio Banderas, and discovers that he's married and is very disappointed.
Fair.
So like, there's Madonna doing these kind of like backroom like hijinks, and then Madonna as like this like giant like world conquering pop star. And a big portion of it actually, and the film was kind of like in some ways groundbreaking for this, is that like at the time, and to a certain extent since, but definitely at the time it was peak. Madonna had just done the Vogue song, which I think was in connection with Dick Tracy, and had been throughout the 80s, like, adjacent to kind of like the subculture of queer music and club, like queer club scene and all that. And so all of her dancers are gay men, and she spends quite a lot of time with them in the verite sections of the film. And I was reading like reviews at the time, and this is wild to me because this is not the kind of movie that it is, but reviews at the time compared the film to Paris is Burning, just in the sense of it like casually presenting like queer people like in a documentary context, which was, in 1991, something that mainstream film basically never did. And so the movie is kind of like a landmark for that. It was the highest grossing documentary of all time, I guess, until 2002. At least that's what Wikipedia says. And I think 2002 must have been, it's like Fahrenheit 9/11 or something like that. That probably surpassed it. But another reason that this film is kind of like a landmark is that it kind of set the tone for these kind of celebrity documentaries where you have these kind of verite sections. A lot of like retrospective reviews have kind of like positioned it as like a forerunner to like kind of the modern like celebrity based reality television. So like Keeping Up with the Kardashians and all that sort of stuff, where you have this kind of like ridiculous persona that may or may not be engaging in like pseudo scripted events. Like, I mean, it seems clear that certain parts are either rehearsed or reenacted, but other parts cannot be, because they're like at, public events and things like that. So there's this weird tone throughout of not being sure like what is the performance and what is actually being captured of like genuine Madonna, which is like a really nice dovetail with her career, which is like, largely been about like performance and controlling her image. And especially at this time in the early 90s, like really pushing boundaries in terms of sexuality and depiction of sexuality and stuff. And like in the films that she acted in. If you haven't listened to the most recent season of You Must Remember This, there's a fairly lengthy episode about Madonna's kind of like sexual button pushing at the time in like the early 90s. And I think this film like kind of captures the weirdness of that, because on the one hand, she's this like very corporate, very mainstream pop artist who is making songs that aren't like super challenging. I mean, even though they're good and like really fun, like it's not like she's some like kind of like, out there artist. So there's like a certain manicuredness about like who Madonna is, and it's clear that she and the people around her have a very heightened sense of, we have to control our environment to control like the messages and images we send out, like, which has become increasingly the case for pop stars over the years, I think. Which is another way that this is kind of interesting, is it kind of captures Madonna as she and a couple other celebrities are kind of crafting that thing, where your public persona is part of your performance. But you're also the whole time kind of questioning her authenticity, and like, the appeal of a documentary like this is to see behind the scenes. But with someone who is as savvy as Madonna, and with a camera that, has the appearance of verite, but, who knows like the actual mechanics of like achieving this footage, there's just this tension throughout of like, is what we're seeing like the real Madonna and all that sort of stuff. And a little bit of that, again, has become old hat since, because it's become kind of a language unto itself with like documentary filmmaking and reality television and all that. But like Madonna herself is just a wildly entertaining and also very annoying figure at this time. You know, she is just such an enormous personality. Where she just does and says things. I mean, like I've already mentioned, like wanting to sleep with Antonio Banderas, but being mad that he was married, like, and talking about it for a long time. Or there's this part where she's trying to get Warren Beatty to like perform for the camera, and he's not, and she's just like, being really like, she's clearly like, playing this up and mugging for the camera, and which is weird for Warren Beatty, but like he's very reluctant to do it, and he just kind of doesn't want to be on camera, and so he's just like there looking uncomfortable while she is like doing this like, outsized like personality. I don't know. She's like, a presence to be reckoned with. But also the film itself is kind of interesting for the reasons I already said. So I had a good time with this. I mean, this film is still, I think, pretty highly regarded. Enough so that the Selena Gomez documentary that came out a couple years ago, or actually My Mind and Me, Selena Gomez specifically asked the same director of Truth or Dare, whose name is Alex Keshishian. I don't know. I'm definitely not pronouncing that right. But Selena Gomez specifically sought out this guy because she liked Madonna, Truth or Dare, or at least it had a reputation, that she liked. And so, I mean, it's good. If you like Madonna, it's definitely going to be good. If you don't like Madonna, it might be interesting otherwise, or a good tool for confirming your dislike of her, because there's definitely things to dislike here. But yeah, I don't know.
How does it kind of, just kind of racing in my mind, like you can go as far back as something like A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles.
Yeah.
But then like more recently stuff, you mentioned the Selena Gomez doc, but like even Beyonce's Homecoming, you've had a number of different pop stars, whether it's Katy Perry or Taylor Swift or whomever, who have like kind of created similar things. How does this one kind of either, does something like Hard Day's Night inform this, or does this one seem to be more informing what we're seeing now when it comes to pop stars and these types of films?
I mean, it's not a narrative film like Hard Day's Night is, it's so, I mean, I think it's like engaging in some of that same, we have one of the most famous people on the planet in front of the camera. How do we deal with that? It's like the same kind of like interesting question. But I would say its approach is not like super similar. Like for one, it's not really trying to make Madonna seem likable, and it's unclear to me if Madonna herself is interested in being likable here. Like I said, like she's such a strong personality, whereas the Beatles in Hard Day's Night are like endlessly affable. Like they are like, that movie is there to capitalize on Beatlemania by magnifying it, whereas this movie is meant to, like, Madonna at this point in her career was just interested at some point in transgression, and this movie is meant to, like, I think what she's trying to do in this movie is to kind of in some ways like poke at that transgression a little bit further. And so by not kind of playing to the, I'm going to kind of like try to be sympathetic or be, show like my soul, that's a thing that puts it in like almost in contrast with a lot of other like celebrity documentaries up to that point. Like it's not like a fluff piece in the sense of you watch it and you're like, I feel like I've just seen a PR like, piece. But it's also not that, because it's clear that there's a performance being done. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. Cause I mean, I think, like I love Beyonce's Homecoming, but it's not necessarily like, I don't feel like it's just fully, Beyonce showing you what she wants you to see.
Absolutely. And I would say that like the like non-concert footage in Homecoming is significantly more obviously manicured than like what's here. Like, I mean, and that's not necessarily to say anything negative about Homecoming. I like that. But with Homecoming, it's almost like this kind of like montage, like when it's not the thing. Whereas this is like, I don't know. I mean, the black and white footage may be trying to evoke like "Don't Look Back" or something like that. You know, where it's meant to seem like really off the cuff.
Mhm.
You know, whereas Beyonce's is meant to seem like, I mean, Beyonce's project as a persona for the past decade at least has been to seem otherworldly. You know,
Mhm.
or like extraordinarily elevated, and I don't know. I don't think that's what's happening here. There's a weird sense in which like Madonna is trying like really hard to be just seem like one of the guys or whatever. Especially in her relationships with her dancers, which she spends a lot of time with. Like, you know, she's her employer. She's like the boss, but she's like hanging around them. Like, there's this really kind of uncomfortable sequence at the end of the film, which is where it gets its title, where they play Truth or Dare. Like the camera, like, you know, is just sitting there and they're playing Truth or Dare, and like she's the one who asks someone Truth or Dare first, and the person says Dare, and she tells the guy like take off your pants, and or no, it's like, you know, take out your penis or something. It's something like, you know, extraordinarily forward, and that's kind of like the tone of a lot of their interactions. And I think she's trying at certain points just to say, like, you know, I am, just because I'm a pop star, I don't have to conform to like mainstream sensibilities, you know, just like my dancers are not mainstream. But on the other hand, like, she is an extraordinarily powerful person who is employing these people, telling them to do that. And she's also not gay. You know, she's like engaging in kind of queer iconography without being so. And, you know, I know her relationship with the queer community is kind of fraught, you know, for that very reason. But I think Beyonce would never allow herself to appear this way on camera. Also, the ratio is off. Like in Beyonce's Homecoming, you're seeing concert footage for like at least 75% of the film, and then the rest is like her kind of home movie stuff. Whereas in this one, it's at least over half of the movie is non-concert footage.
Is the concert footage any good?
Do you mean the
like does it work as a concert film?
It doesn't. It's not like an extraordinary concert film. It's about what you would expect. There's a lot of edits. There's a lot of you know, kind of camera movements that are kind of dramatic. The concert footage is not what stood out to me as being interesting about it, although it's like impressive because it's like a very fun, energetic, elaborate concert. But in terms of how it's made, like, you know, it's not Stop Making Sense or something like that.
I asked ever since Karina did that episode, and You Must Remember This, I've been curious to watch it because I've never seen it before.
That's actually why I sought this out. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been in college when it came out. And I wasn't like a diehard cinephile then, but I would have been reading like Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly. And I don't remember the discourse around the film having anything to do with the film. It was always just about Madonna, which I guess makes sense. I mean, yeah, like I can't even imagine what the actual concert footage is. I don't think I've ever seen any of it. I don't remember
wild.
Anybody talking about it. It's just
the concert itself is wild. Like, everyone's dressed like priests, and like they're all doing like intentionally sacrilegious stuff. You know, like sexualizing religious iconography, which is like Madonna's whole thing with like a prayer. Apparently, this is in the documentary. They talk about it. The Pope came out and said, "Don't go to Madonna's concerts because of this." You know, so good for Madonna. They have also footage of police showing up in Toronto when she's performing there and threatening to arrest her for like lewd, like an obscene imagery. So, like, I mean, the film is like about Madonna, so it makes sense that there's like only discourse about Madonna at the time. Kind of takes all the air out of the room because she's so big.
Yeah. Because it would have been in the next year or so that she did the Sex Book and then the Erotica album, right?
Yeah, this was all in the same couple of years, for sure. Because like a Prayer is end of the 80s maybe, and then she does all those films, like Body of Evidence. When is that? It's like 93 or 92 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, worth a watch if you're at all interested in Madonna, or if you were intrigued by the You Must Remember This episode, which is how I got onto this. I think it's got a Blu-ray out. I got a DVD from the library.
Public library approved. Cool. We're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna talk about some big time stars, but they're big time theater stars of the 1800s in France.
And they talk a lot less than Madonna did.
Talk a lot less than Madonna in part 2 after this. Darren, Michael was the first one to watch it. He just like messaged us in our Slack channel and was like, did not expect all the mines in this.
Well,
thought it was going to be about the French Resistance.
I had mistaken the making of story for the actual film. So I was like, where are the Nazis?
Just a bunch of mimes and theater performers.
Hey, is it possible to mute yourself on this?
Yeah, there should be. I don't know if you see it at the bottom. There's like a little thing. It says mute, stop cam, all that. You can just mute yourself
about that.
There.
Obviously.
No, you're good.
Okay.
All right. I got a little bit longer note sheet because there is just a lot of Nazi stuff.
Yeah. Wasn't
the other day? I was just going to say quickly. This weekend, I had so much yard work to do, and so I don't know if you knew this, but if you use the Criterion app on your phone, you can download the commentary tracks and listen to them like podcasts.
Oh, no way!
So I listened to all 3 hours of the commentary, and it was super. Like the first hour and a half, especially. It's the two halves are done by two different scholars, and the first half is really, really good. And I had no idea that some of these were like true life figures.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. Super interesting.
Who does the commentary?
I don't know.
Okay, just academics.
I didn't recognize their names.
Okay. Cool.
Let me see. I have a Criterion channel here. We'll pull it up real quick. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, the mime and the actor are real people.
Yeah. Yeah, and the mime ended up being sentenced to death for
Brian Stonehill and Charles Affron.
Yeah.
Wait, why was he sentenced to death?
For murder. And like at some point there was a draft of the script that alluded to it. But insane.
Damn. They should have included that in the movie.
No,
I guess
he just in love.
He does have a kind of bummer ending regardless, so
yeah. It's pretty brutal seeing him run past his kid just completely.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Well, and like his like the way they connected the two characters was that I guess when the mime was when that guy, it was like a big deal whenever he was in trial and ended up getting killed. And they were also just like, this story of this mime will be perfect for the actor character to like, that's like a perfect role for him to like really sink his teeth into. So that's like what connected the two, I think, in Carnet's mind as well as a screenwriter. All right. Also, a fun little tidbit about Jacques Tati in this. So here we go.
Oh, wow. Nice.
I always enjoy your intros, Zach.
It's something. They're special, especially this one, which will be in French, which is not my not my best language. But it's okay. I'll prepare myself for Montreal. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And we're back with part 2 of episode 453 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll be continuing Young Critics Watch Old Movies with 1945's Children of Paradise, directed by Marcel Carnet from a script by Jacques Prévert. The film stars it's Arletty? I think this is the main actors. Arletty, Jean-Louis Barrault, Pierre Brasser, Marcel Herand, and Pierre Renoir. Excuse me, Pierre Renoir. It was Jean Renoir's older brother or father or something like that. In this expansive drama, the lovely and enigmatic Parisian actress Garance draws the attention of various men in her orbit, including the thoughtful mind Baptiste, and the ambitious actor Frédéric. Though Garance and Baptiste have an undeniable connection, their fortunes shift considerably, pushing them apart as well as bringing them back together, even as they pursue other relationships and lead separate lives. The four men courting Garance are all based on real French personalities of the 1820s and 1830s. Baptiste de Barou was a famous mime, and Frédéric Lemaitre was an acclaimed actor on the Boulevard of Crime depicted in the film. Pierre Lacenaire was an infamous French criminal, and the fictional character of Comte Edouard de Montreuil was inspired by Duc de Mornay. The idea for making a movie based on these characters came from a chance meeting between Carnet and Jean-Louis Barrault in Nice, during which Barrault pitched the idea of making a movie based on the actor and mime characters. Barrault told him about a famous 19th century mime, Jean-Baptiste Gaspard de Barou, who had been given a facelift to the art of pantomime at the Théâtre des Funambules, one of the most famous performance halls on the Boulevard du Temple in Paris. Dubarou went down in history when he killed a drunk who bothered him. During his trial, all of Paris rushed to finally hear him speak. Barrault recalls feeling the same excitement for Charlie Chaplin's first talkie a few years earlier. Then was born the idea of a film which would confront spoken theater and mime, and where the famous actor of the time, Frédéric Lemaitre, would have a role to play. Carnet, who at the time was hesitant about which movie to direct next, proposed the idea to his friend Jacques Prévert. Jacques Prévert was initially reluctant to write a movie about a mime. Quote, Jacques hated pantomime, his brother once said, but Barrault assured Prévert that he and his teacher, Etienne Decroix, Decroix, who plays Baptiste's father in the film, would take responsibility for developing the mime sequences. The Germans were then occupying the whole of France, and Prévert is rumored to have said, quote, they will not let me do a movie about Lacenaire, but I can put Lacenaire in a film about Dubourg. The script incorporates quotations from the famed criminal's autobiography. Margot Capellier, Prévert's assistant on writing, said, quote, the film was a miracle. We lacked everything. There was a set of motivated energies around these children of paradise in reaction also against the atmosphere of that time. The film was made under extremely difficult conditions. External sets in Nice were badly damaged by natural causes, exacerbated and compounded by the theatrical constraints during the German occupation of France during World War II. The film was split into two parts because the distributor Gaumont could only screen a 3-hour film half as many times as usual. By making the film a pseudo double feature, the distributor could charge 80 francs per admission, double the usual amount, therefore making up the shortfall. Jean-Louis Barrault, who played Baptiste, was committed to the premiere production of The Satin Slipper, which was a hit, and almost offered his role to a music hall entertainer that was little known at the time, Jacques Tati, before a schedule was negotiated which allowed him to fulfill both roles. Many of the 1,800 extras were resistance agents using the film as daytime cover, who under the liberation had to mingle with some collaborators or Vichy sympathizers who were imposed on the production by the authorities. Alexander Troner, who designed the sets, and Joseph Kozma, who composed the music, were Jewish and had to work in secrecy during the production. Music was provided by the Orchestre de la Société des Concerts du Conservatoire, under the direction of renowned conductor Charles Munch, who personally contributed part of his income to the French resistance. The set builders were short of supplies, the camera crew's film stock was rationed, the financing, originally a French-Italian production, collapsed a few weeks after production began in Nice due to the Allied conquest of Sicily in August 1943. Around this time, the Nazis forbade the producer from working on the film because of his remote Jewish ancestry, and the production had to be suspended for 3 months. The French company Pathé took over production, whose cost was escalating wildly. The quarter-mile-long main set, the Boulevard du Temple, was severely damaged by a storm and had to be rebuilt. By the time shooting resumed in Paris in early spring of 1944, the director of photography had been assigned to another production, and his replacement had to analyze all the reels in order to match the lighting of the non-sequential shot list. All the while, electricity in the Paris studios was intermittent. Production was delayed again after the Allies landed in Normandy, perhaps intentionally stalled so that it would only be completed after the French liberation. When Paris was liberated in August 1944, the actor Robert Levigan, cast in the role of informer thief Jericho, was sentenced to death by the resistance for collaborating with the Nazis and had to flee along with author Celine to Sigmaringen. He was replaced at the moment's notice by Pierre Renoir, older brother of French filmmaker Jean Renoir and the son of the famous painter. And most of the scenes had to be redone. He was tried and convicted as a Nazi collaborator in 1946. One scene featuring him survives in the middle of the second part, where Jericho snitches to Natalie. The New York Times in 1947 said the strong philosophical disposition of the French film director Marcel Carné to scan through the medium of cinema the irony and pathos of life, a disposition most memorably demonstrated in his great pre-war film Quai du Brumes, has apparently not been altered by the tragic experience of the last few years, as witness his most ambitious picture, Les Enfants du Paradis. For in this long and fervid French picture, which was more or less clandestinely made during the Nazi occupation under circumstances of the most exacting sort, Monsieur Carnet is platonically observing the melancholy masquerade of life, the riddle of truth and illusion of La Comédie Humaine. And if that sounds like a mouthful, you must rest emphatically assured that Carnet has bitten off a portion no less difficult to chew. And Variety in 1947 said this ambitious French feature turns out to be a strange mixture of the beautiful, the esoteric, and the downright dull. Some startling flashes of inspired mime cry and fresh Gaelic humor are wedded to the not un-Hollywoodian concept of the femme fatale who, willy-nilly in this instance, leads men to their ruin in an uneven performance of writing and directing. So it didn't seem like the Americans were fans, but here we are today. Darren, I was going to start with you because this is the first time you had seen this movie in a long while. So I'm curious, if what your impression was before and then rewatching it for the podcast. What was it like?
Yeah, so I grew up. I'm no longer a young critic watching old movies. I'm an old critic rewatching old movies. But I grew up in the suburbs where I had no access in the 80s and early 90s to very much world cinema at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure I watched Children of Paradise when the original Criterion DVD was released. Would have been, I don't know, very early 2000s. So 20 years ago or so was the last time and the first time I'd watched it. I remember coming away from it. My lasting memory was that I wish I were fluent in French, because the script is to me the standout of this film. I mean, I mentioned this already, but it's so tightly structured as what could be almost like a treatise on the various thoughts about love. Is it there's the poetic ideal of love in Baptiste. There's the Frederic is sort of the more carnal,
Mm-hmm.
Pleasure seeker. The Count is sort of removed from it all. So on the paper, it would be so easy to almost plot the various points in the film, like almost like philosophical or rhetorical points of the film.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, at least for me, it's like easy to forgive it for being so tightly structured, because each individual conversation is so strong. I feel like they're kind of exhausting the ideas of love in this film.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the performances for me work so well as embodiments of those types of love,
Mm-hmm.
that I just sort of like sail right along with it. I'm never, we can talk maybe about the end. I have some issues with the end of the film, but like generally speaking, especially for the first hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, I'm just like fully locked in on those conversations.
Yeah, it's so like painted broadly, in terms, like you're describing like the different characters. They do have like their kind of archetypes to a degree, but it's painted so broadly, and you just kind of have like so much like just weightless emotion, and like and everything kind of flowing through it, that you just kind of get carried through it pretty easily. Michael, what was your impression of the movie? Had you seen it before?
I had not. No, this is the first time, and I signed up for this podcast because I wanted to make myself watch it. And I liked it. I didn't have any idea what to expect of it because we were talking off mic. I didn't know what this movie was about. I just knew it was like, oh, made with the French Resistance or whatever. And in my head, I was like, well, this is going to be a World War II movie, which obviously immediately opens on a bustling French street in like the 19th century, and you're like, oh, okay. But no, I liked it. And like I said, I had no idea like where it was gonna go. Like from the moment I realized it wasn't what I thought it was gonna be. And I mean, a big part of this movie, this is fairly surface level, but I'm simply not familiar outside of like the extraordinarily broad like Marcel Marceau like stereotypes or whatever. Like I'm not that familiar with like pantomime as an art form, and a lot of this movie is devoted to the staging of it. So a lot of this movie I was just kind of interested in that, and it's kind of amazing how troubled and difficult the production is because the parts that you would imagine would be the hardest parts of a movie to craft during a wartime occupation, aka like the sets and mise en scène and all that sort of stuff. Like it looks tremendous. Like there's every shot. There's so much to look at. It's just like a really sumptuous looking movie that I was really drawn into it on that level. So what you're saying now, Darren, about like how each of the characters is a certain like archetype of love. I hadn't quite burrowed into it on that schematic of a level yet. I think because a lot of the movie I was just kind of enraptured in. I mean, just the crowd shots. Like the crowd shots are just incredible in this movie. There's, I am amazed that it's like a set, like a quarter-mile long set, like Zach, because it looks so good. I don't know. It's pretty surface level, but that was my main takeaway, having not seen this before, was just being impressed by the kind of just depth of what was in the frame each time.
This is such a there's no depth to what I'm about to say, but I agree, Michael. Like when the movie opened, I had this moment where I thought, like, how long has it been since I saw a new movie that could afford to costume a couple hundred extras in a crowd scene?
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's a kind of filmmaking that was just like standard issue for decades, and now it's like there's no financing system that allows for that kind of massive crowd scene.
Or if there is, you CGI it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I just
totally.
watched the trailer for the Ridley Scott Napoleon movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and they have like this scene where he's like walking the streets of Paris, and like it doesn't feel like this movie with when they're walking the streets of Paris and Napoleon.
And this also, just by coincidence, I also rewatched for the first time in 20 years Rome Open City, which I'm pretty sure the last time I watched it was on a bad VHS tape. So, it was barely legible. And so to watch the new restoration, or the relatively recent restoration on Criterion, the fact that film was being shot on the streets of Italy, of Rome, around the same time this was being shot in Nice.
Yeah.
And just two completely different visions of Europe in 1944 couldn't be more different. Yeah, it's impossible to imagine that film, Children in Paradise, being made during World War II.
Yeah. The one thing that I was also thinking about, just in terms, going back to the point, Michael, you're making about just the pantomime, like they have extended sequences of some of the theatrical productions, but they have that one extended sequence for the most part of the one performance, the pantomime performance, with I think Frederic and Baptiste are in the same show, and it's not nearly as extensive and as as like focused on as this movie, but I was thinking a lot like that Powell and Pressburger must have watched it in terms of like having the performance within the performance in the Red Shoes. Like it just reminded me like where you just kind of get teleported into like it just the movie becomes this performance. You kind of get sucked in for, it's not very long. It's like a 15-20 minute stretch, but you're watching this like pantomime performance pretty, fully acted out. So, one of I'm curious the some of the stuff that I read briefly about this movie called it like the most French movie, like the French movie, this is the movie that like this is the most French movie of all time, and I kind of tend to agree with that. There's a lot of French movie tendencies in this, but I feel like it also it's such a it's such a striking difference from. I guess my point is that it's interesting to think of this as like the kind of epitome of French cinema compared to what we would generally like point to, like the French New Wave or something like that, like Truffaut and Godard and people like that. Truffaut, I read a quote, was a giant fan of this movie, and it's just kind of interesting to see this kind of listed as like this epitome of French cinema, when I don't think a lot of times we may look over this and look towards that French New Wave period of time.
Yeah, I do think that like, so another thing that was said off mic about this film was that in America this was promoted at times as like the French version of Gone with the Wind, or the French response to Gone with the Wind, or something. What was the line? Yeah,
it was the
French
response, which is better.
And yeah, there you go.
The French saw Gone with the Wind and we're like, we got to show you guys.
Nazi resistance is the same thing as Southern fables. But anyway, I think one thing that is actually an interesting parallel with Gone with the Wind is that, like, both America and France, like, they're kind of like filmmaking mainstream gets pretty radically shuffled up, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And both Gone with the Wind and this movie are, in terms of scope and like, I guess, craft, a kind of apex of a filmmaking style that is like of its era more so than, like Gone with the Wind, as racist as it is like the Technicolor film, like the Hollywood Technicolor film in terms of craft. Maybe there's a few others, but like you're talking about like apex of like the old studio system, like that's that. And I can imagine, I'm not nearly as familiar with like pre-French New Wave. I mean, I've watched a few like Renoir and all that sort of stuff, but I can imagine this movie having that kind of similarly totemic, like the scale and precision of what was accomplished here within an older way of filmmaking, is something that is kind of parallel to that in the only way I would actually consider it parallel.
Zach, you said that you sort of agreed with the idea that this is the most French film. So what is that?
Pretty French.
What does that mean? I mean, I have my own thoughts, but
there was a lot of affairs. There's a lot of people in love, unable to, or like overly expressing their love.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Paris and like pretty Paris sequences. There's lots of drinking.
There's lots of, I mean, it's a horny movie, but it's also people want to talk about how they're horny and why they're horny. And I think it's that talking that makes it specifically French. Like they want, it's the discourse. It's like the debate that makes it stereotypically French.
Like
in a beautiful way.
He can never seal the deal. They talk too much, and like if he just shut the hell up for 5 seconds, he maybe could have sex with her, and like they could have felt on in love way. But he like has to like talk, and like literally at the one point he like talks for too long, and then Frederic shows up and screws the whole thing up. I'm like, yeah, man, like just come on.
He has his chance.
I mean, he's miming all day. He's got to get those words out sometime.
Yeah. I also was, to be fair, was struggling with Baptiste just as a character. Mm-hmm. He was fine, but like I don't know, like 20 minutes in, it clicked in my mind that he reminded me of Conan O'Brien, and I just couldn't unsee it.
the exact same thought.
Right? Yeah, I couldn't unsee it, and it was screwing me up. I'm just like he just like the actor Jean-Louis Barrault, like just completely reminded me of like a young Conan O'Brien.
Well, Conan deserves love too.
I mentioned very casually that like I have some issues with the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's like I get that Baptiste represents, he works on paper for me as like this figure of he can't consummate the relationship when he first meets her because that would destroy his ideal vision of or whatever, this overly idealistic, romantic, perfect sense of love. And so when he finally, and I think the actor is okay in that role, but at the very end, when they do sort of finally get together, I struggle to believe that this woman loves this man in any meaningful way. And it's because of the actor, not because of the structure of the film or the script. It's just like that guy I just find totally unconvincing as the object of 6 years of
yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, I definitely like the first part way more than the second part. The second part, as they're trying to kind of bring everything together, I don't know. I honestly, I didn't like. I kind of felt like it gets rushed from the moment the police are there at the very end of the first part with her to the second part where they're kind of catching everything up 7 years later. I'm just like, that's just kind of moved very quickly. And like to what we were talking about at the beginning, I was really honestly like, this was a bit of like a vibe movie where it was just like, if it was just them kind of like fighting over the different plays and the different acting styles and like her kind of bouncing around to these 4 different dudes who all have very distinct different lives. If that was the whole movie, I'd be completely fine with it. I really didn't need it to lead anywhere. I was completely good with just the breeziness of just, them hanging. I like the blind, not blind guy with the bird. I like the little the informer thief that Jean Renoir's brother played. Like I'm like that. You had all these little kooky characters. I'm like, yeah, this is fun. Like give me like 2.5 hours of this.
Avril, the henchman who gets his hot chocolate after their first assault.
Yeah, like you're just like, you got all these like kooky people around like doing, and they're all like trying to fall in love and put on their plays and stuff. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like that's all I need. Then it gets all complicated with with all these emotions and other things. I'm like, I wish it was back in the good old days of just hanging around, doing whatever in 19th century France.
I do think that like there is like some weird pacing that I don't know. I wonder how it would feel. I mean, I guess it's kind of like inherently a 2-part story, regardless, because you have the time jump. But like the very end of part 1, which you just mentioned, Zach, where the count comes in, he's like, "Hey, you should marry me," and she's like, "I don't know about that," and he's like, "Here's my little card in case you change your mind." And then I was imagining that coming back much further in the movie, but it's like within 5 minutes. She's like, "Oh, never mind. I've been accused of a crime, and now I have to be like." It was like that. That seemed like it was seeding something that was going to be much longer gestating than it was, and I don't know. Like the second part has some of that same stuff too, where by the end of the film, there's like the assassination of the oh man, I'm forgetting his name.
The Count.
Yeah, but I don't remember the Count's name. But the assassination of the Count, and like the ending of part 2, like everything just like rushes through this. I don't know, like Darren, I don't quite not believe the love between Garance and Baptiste, but I don't believe how it ends up where they come together at the end of the film, because it feels so quick, and the distance between when they come together at the end of the film or near the end of the film and then the actual end of the film, with the assassination and then like her going through the crowd, like leaving, and he can't catch up with her, like it all happens way too fast, like that. I don't know. I agree that I enjoyed the characters. There is something about the structure and pacing that bothered me, though. Feels mean to say that about a movie that was employing the French Resistance and a miracle to piece together. But maybe they should have saved some of this for the editing room.
Yeah, just the whole her getting accused of murder and arrested, like all that kind of stuff. It felt like almost like this like scattered Dumas plot that like you thought she was like gonna like go away for like it needed almost a little bit more time to like kind of simmer because like it happens and like then you kind of there's a little overture, you go into part two and then she kind of shows up pretty quickly afterwards. You're like, oh hey, what's up? I thought you were gone. I don't know. It
Do you
just
guys think the film is too schematic? Because I mean, Darren, at the beginning, you kind of pointed out how the different male, love interests are all kind of representative of different things. I mean, is the film just too interested in that as a conceit rather than and is maybe disinterested in some of the connective tissue, or is this something else?
No, I mean, it sounds like I like the film more than you guys do. I think it's actually like maybe one of the greatest scripts ever. Like, I love the script of this film.
Yeah.
And so I don't mind the schematic nature of it, the design of it. I just wonder if, like, for me, not all of it works quite by design. Like, I'm curious, what did you all think of Natalie at the end of the film? Baptiste's wife.
Is her last scene? I'm trying to remember. Is her last scene where she walks into the room?
Yeah, and she finds them together.
Yeah,
and she gets her speech.
To be honest, like, Natalie, of the core cast, like, Natalie was the character I felt like I understood the least, and she was just there as a device. Of course, Baptiste is married now and can't be with his true love, and so there's just the wife. I don't know. I kind of just expected that to happen.
That was another character who I didn't believe they were in love because
They're not, right?
Yeah, well, it just seemed like they had like a kind of a relationship, and then she's like, "Yeah, he's with me." Like for the whole first part, she's like, "Yeah, but he's with me. Like he's with me," And so, yeah, I think I felt kind of the same way, where like I get why she's there as this device to kind of be in the middle of like his true love and finding his true love, but
I asked because the guy who does the commentary track for the second half of Criterion release talks about how Natalie is so designed to be very unsympathetic. She's supposed to represent this like version of domestic, bondage or something like that. Baptiste is trapped with Natalie. And maybe it's just because I'm getting old, or maybe I'm become cynical about love or something. But I actually really like her speech as a counterbalance to the romantic, idealist version of love that Baptiste has, because she basically says, "Look, I live with him every day."
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, that's hard in a relationship. Pining from a distance for 6 years, that's easy.
No, that's true.
You guys spent like 3 hours together one day 6 years ago. Like, I'm not buying into.
I've washed this dude's dirty underwear. Like, screw him.
Well,
but also like I've seen him with our kid.
Yeah.
He's actually pretty great. Like they're, yeah. And that's the other part that I struggle with the end, is I'm just like, Baptiste, you're kind of an asshole. Like, what are you doing? You're pining after this impossible vision for love, as opposed to for Garance.
I do have to add, I felt bad for her in part one, because in part one she is that kind of like idealist, right? Like a little, and she, and because of the way that the film sets it up, that she's doomed in that, because that Baptiste doesn't really isn't that interested in her, and he's clearly pining for Garance. Is it Garance, right? Garance. Yeah. So she's like tragic in the first part, almost. But then in the second part, again, the connective tissue wasn't there. Like, she just became like, in the first part, she's a device in the sense of like a kind of foil to Baptiste, you know, and with the pining. And the second part, she seems to exist as like an obstacle, or not an obstacle, but like a dramatic catalyst, you know. I get what you're saying about the final speech. It felt kind of programmatic to me, because that's the only thing she could have said at that moment.
Yeah.
You know, and I wouldn't have. She could have said that at the beginning of part 2, and it would have resonated the same with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't mean to sound down on this movie. I actually really like this movie.
I did
So
too.
we've kind of gotten on this negative gear, but I thought this movie was good.
Yeah.
I think it's one. I think I'll get more out of it on second viewing. You know, it's kind of big. There's a lot of mechanisms going on. You're kind of feeling out what's happening. And I think if I watched it again with a little bit more understanding and intention kind of going in, I think I would get more out of it. Kind of knowing how the beats work and how things are operating. I think it'd be one of those where you really relish in like how the machinations are working.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ever have a spare 3 hours again.
Have y'all seen any of the director's other films?
I feel like I have, but it would have been, again, 20 years ago. So I can't remember.
Yeah. I don't recognize any of these titles except for Children of Paradise, excuse me.
I guess at this you know, in this period of time, he's definitely one of the most prominent French directors. With you know, in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, and I know he worked with Jacques Prévert on several of those films, so I'm kind of curious now to watch them.
Mm-hmm. So, any final thoughts? Any closing thoughts on Children of Paradise? I mean, even though we were just negative on it, I also recommend it. It's definitely one. I don't know. It feels like a big big movie to kind of, if you really just want to dive into like a big movie. I think this is one well worth your time.
This is gonna sound like a negative question, which is not. I'm just curious, like, because this movie is highly acclaimed. I'm looking on Wikipedia, and like, basically, like the French version of AFI, it feels like in 1995 called this the best film ever made. And you know, it obviously has like this enormous reputation. And I'm interested, like, what about this movie, like, do you think has made it have that sort of legacy? You know, because you know when I'm familiar with like French films, it's either the new wave or like Rules of the Game, or you know, those sort of like Renoir, like kind of social satires, right? And this is neither of those things, right? This is a very like kind of traditional sort of film. Like, you know, what do you think has given it the legacy that it has above, like, you know, what's maybe internationally the more kind of acclaimed French cinema?
Mm-hmm. You haven't watched any Tati, correct? We've talked about.
Oh no, I watched all of them. I went through when we did our series.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, when I think of French, I think of the French New Wave, Tati, Jacques Demy, which kind of, you know, works off of French New Wave, you know, Agnes Varda, Chantal Ackerman.
I mean, I guess it's kind of similar to in America, like when people ask what's the greatest film of all time, people say like Casablanca or whatever, which is, you know, a thoroughly like out of time, you know, or like classic Hollywood films, you know, and those are amazing films.
I would
Maybe
say
not.
They probably say The Godfather. I'm not agreeing with it. I'm just saying that's what I.
No. I agree. I'm trying to think of like the
Citizen
parallel.
Kane.
Or Citizen Kane.
I feel like that one's fallen out. Like I feel like Casablanca and Citizen Kane have fallen out as like the obvious choices. Now it's like The Godfather,
the Hitchcock, like Psycho or Rear Window, or
not even
Vertigo.
that. We have such bad opinions in America.
What I'm saying is like domestic, domestic
sorry.
opinions of their greatest films.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting that like that says something interesting about, like, you know, the films themselves, that they become known as, like, the fact that Citizen Kane was for such a long time kind of consensus greatest American film. Like, that says something interesting about like what we consider our national cinema.
Yeah, but
And
I was just gonna say, going back to maybe like the question of like, well, why do you like it does have this like really strong string of nationalism to it, like there is like this pride in the work of these performers. You have Paris like on full display, like it was used as this kind of um liberation French nationalistic like hurrah, we've the Nazis are out, they're defeated, like this movie's coming out kind of thing. And so I think a lot, like I think you have to kind of consider that, going back to the notes, like consider that cultural context around it as well, as like they're just getting out of the occupation. Like you have this film that's been going on, it was supposed to come out, but was going on and people knew about it and were like anticipating it coming out. We're really holding out hope to like see it once the occupation was done. And so it comes out and it's kind of almost like this is the kind of, this is, we're out of it type. Like this is the thing to kind of celebrate. We're out of the Nazi occupation, and like France is France again type thing. So maybe that plays into it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. If you would like to learn more, head to Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary or Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary. If you would like to support the show, support us at patreon.com/Cinematary. Big thanks to our patrons, Cam, Chad Newsom, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsathi, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate the support. If you'd like to support us, we'll probably do a Patreon pick thing soon, so throw $1 our way. You just have to pay the $1 and you get to make us watch something, what
Bargain.
better way to,
and it may become our most listened to episode of all time.
Yeah. Andrew's students have done it. Everybody's done it. On the next episode for Young Critics, we're going to be diving into a movie I'm excited to watch because I have not seen it since I had to watch it in school during film studies classes. But we're finally doing a Ingmar Bergman film on Cinematary, which seems way overdue at 454.
Wait, which
episodes.
one is it? Which one is it that we ended up doing?
We're doing Wild Strawberries from 1957.
Oh, nice.
So, no, I take that back. We did Seventh Seal. I take that back. We've done Seventh Seal.
Yeah, that was also a Young Critics movie, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but yeah, Wild Strawberries. So it's still not that much Bergman for a podcast that's had 454 episodes. We have an episode of Shrek
Romeo
3.
and Juliet.
It's Shrek 3, but we don't have much Bergman. But until then, thank you all for listening. We'll see you next episode.